Welcome to The Heart of the Matter, an Our Place podcast, where we look at the issues surrounding homelessness, addiction, and mental health on the streets of Greater Victoria.
Hello, I'm Stephen Seltzer, Manager of Community and Corporate Partnerships for Our Place, and I'm pleased to welcome Mayor Marianne Alto, Victoria Mayor, to today's Heart of the Matter podcast.
Nice to see you. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. Before I start, I should mention that we respectfully acknowledge the Kwanghan-speaking peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations for their gracious hospitality while we provide programs and services within their ancestral lands. Thank you so much for joining me. And it's been a long career already representing Victoria. You were on council since 2010, elected mayor this past year. Can you mention a couple of things that are standing out so far in your first term as mayor?
Yeah, it's right. Thanks, Stephen, for having me. And thank you for doing the territorial acknowledgement. It's so important that we always start our gatherings with that and acknowledging as you say, the grace and generosity of the nations to work with us and help us learn from one another. It's always a great opportunity to say that.
Absolutely.
I have been around for 12 years as a council member and certainly was engaged with a lot of activity for that period of time. 6 months it's only been since I've been mayor. Actually, not quite 6 months since we were sworn in. It'll be next week, next month. Right now, I'd say there haven't been a lot of surprises for me because, of course, I knew going in, I was pretty well informed going in and I knew pretty much what I was getting into. Eyes wide open, as they say. So there hasn't been a lot of surprise from that perspective. From an issues perspective, I think unsurprisingly, people won't be surprised to hear me speak to, the really challenging and complex difficulty of dealing with housing, not just housing for folks who are currently unhoused, but housing broadly. And the necessity for us to be working with so many different partners to try and deal with that as quickly and efficiently and fairly as possible. So certainly that's not been a surprise so much as it's been a challenge. And then just all of the newness around council, as you well know, all of my council members are brand new. Even one individual who has been elected before was away for the COVID term, which was one of the most complex, certainly in our history. Yeah. And so he speaks of himself as being new as well. So it's been a learning curve that's been very steep for them. And I've been trying to, be a facilitator with that learning. And so that's set us off on a slower pace to begin, but I actually think that's good because we've had some time to learn with one another and to see where our priorities fall and begin to imagine, how much we can accomplish. It's a long term, 4 years. And so my message kind of repetitively to my colleagues is pacing. Right? You don't want to try and burn out or do everything by Tuesday. You have a reasonable amount of time and there are urgent matters for sure. But yes, we need to be thoughtful and intentional in our decisions.
Absolutely. And to have a vibrant Victoria, of course, the business community, which is super supportive of Our Place, and a big part of the success and the wonderful city that Victoria is. But lately there have been discussions of some businesses closing, maybe having to even look at going to other municipalities. Government workers have been told that they can work from home, which I would think, again, affects the vibrancy of downtown. Are you starting to feel those shifts and those challenges?
I don't know that we've felt a lot of shifts from the last part of your question yet. And certainly two parts that I kind of heard. The first part is around, the ability of businesses downtown to thrive. And obviously there are many, many complex issues that are affecting them positively and negatively. At the moment, there's a lot of negative stuff in the media. And I think, that's a symptom of a much larger conversation that you and I have had a little bit about. And that's the impact of COVID. And even before that, the evolution and decline of our ability to be civil with one another and how we live together. And it is for so many years, we've taken for granted the fact that we're compassionate, caring, observant, tolerant people. Certainly in Greater Victoria, I think we like to think of ourselves that way, and perhaps in the country as well. And, the last few years have really, I think, challenged us to remember how important that collegiality is and that compassion and that socialization as we've been isolated. And as we've come back from that isolation gradually, it's kind of like we're not used to that anymore. It's as if that's a muscle we forgot to exercise. And so I think that is contributing a lot to what people might couch as general disorder. And certainly there's a lot of impact that the municipality can have in trying to support business particularly, but residents as well. And, that's through direct funding, through, security and policing, through alternative policing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. with investment in the downtown, just around revitalization and that sort of thing. And so all of that is in process, which is great. Specifically on the issue of allowing folks to work from home more predominantly, I expect that will have an impact over time. We haven't seen much of it yet, but we're trying to go back to that investment in the downtown and that revitalization place to be able to encourage more and more people to see it as a destination. And not just for visitors, but for folks who live in the area, in the region. We are the downtown of the region. And so we're looking at how do we make things more interesting? How do we make things feel safer and more comfortable? How do we create opportunities for people to come and enjoy experiential things in the downtown core? And so that's a big part of this council's priorities for the next little while. And so we've already begun that work, and we'll be prioritizing that for some time.
Great. Now, one thing that I've always felt Victoria gets unfairly told is about how they deal, or you deal with social services.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that we have 13 municipalities, and so many people in need are coming to Victoria because that's where the services are. There aren't exactly a lot of other municipalities that are telling people, if you have challenges, come here. We have services for you. So really is a huge load that Victoria has to deal with in terms of supporting those who are struggling with poverty, homelessness, mental health, and so on. Have you had discussions with other municipalities about shared services or opportunities maybe to, sort of decentralize? I'm not saying decentralize is the way to go, but certainly offer services in other parts of our region.
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think it's less about decentralization than it is about fair distribution. When you do speak with people who are in the downtown core, because there are services available here, you can easily and quickly find out that they're not from here. And they're not from far away. They're often just from Sydney or Souk or the Western communities. And those communities in the region are becoming more robust in the services that they offer. And there certainly is a very active conversation among the municipalities about the importance of providing locally accessible services for their own residents. And we're becoming, I think, a bit more comfortable and more sophisticated. I look at the conversation around mental health services, which, even 10 years ago was something we never talked about in public, and which certainly still has stigma attached to it. But, more and more people are becoming more comfortable talking about that as something which is common and requires services. And I think that as we begin conversations like that around, addictions and mental health, around a variety of other psychological and physical services as well, it becomes something that more municipal governors are being able to see as something that they have a responsibility to provide locally and accessibly for their own people, so that they aren't required to go to another municipality to provide, to access those types of services. So conversations are underway. Is it happening fast enough, far enough? No. Would I like there to be more services in further afield and around different municipalities? Yes. And I think that a lot of folks who are in the position of being able to support and fund and design and operate those services are becoming more comfortable and embracing that idea. So you do have satellite services now appearing in the Western communities and up the peninsula, and supportive housing as well is beginning to be diversified, throughout the region. And absolutely, the bulk of it is in the center. And partly that's because we've taken, as you say, responsibility for it longer. And that is, I'd like to think that's out of a sense of compassion and humanity and understanding that people are in need. Somebody has to do the job. And if not us, then who? But that doesn't take away from the fact that we continue to work closely and urgently with our partners in other municipalities and in a variety of agencies as well, and other governments, to say, it's not enough just to have this in the core. Yes, there are services required in the core, but you also need to put services throughout the entire region for so many good reasons. So that, conversations ongoing, lots to do yet.
Right. And I know on our side, for example, View Royal have been super wonderful in helping us host our New Roads Therapeutic Recovery Community. And we work with a couple of charities in the West Shore, as well as Victoria, to hold our Coldest Night of the Year walk, which raises awareness of issues of poverty and homelessness. So there's definitely examples of wonderful work going on. But most people know to come downtown if for example, for food, for shelter, and so on.
Yeah, and part of that's a reflection of the work that you do yourself and with many of your colleagues, in the service providing industry. And this is a way for there to be efficiencies, to have, co-located types of operations, for sure. But I think, that is that conversation about, you see both sides of it. Yes, it's important to make it accessible and easy. And, we've always talked for years about that importance of being able, for a person truly in need, that they don't need to spend much of their very limited energy navigating a system. And so you can go to a single point and be able to access a number of things. But at the same time, it would be better to have pieces of that system, or else a micro version of that one-stop sort of system also located in Langford and Machosen and Souk and Sydney, and so that those folks don't have to add that extra layer of transportation and movement and just to access those types of services.
The other word that is so predominant right now for downtown Victoria and for Victoria is issues of safety. And the idea of safety is a perspective. Like, a lot of people would walk downtown each day and say, you know what, nothing's changed for me. I still feel like I can walk down the streets of Victoria. And of course, there's so many services and businesses. It feels like a vibrant downtown. While as others say that it feels very different from how it did 10 years ago, and I don't feel safe walking down the core. Is the state of Victoria right now somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think you've partially answered the question with your comment. I think it is somewhere in the middle. I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever that in the last 12 years, as I've been on council, the Victoria has moved from being a big town to a city. I spoke about that when I ran for mayor, about the sense that we are a much more urban environment. We are a much more densified environment. We're a city, and that comes with city issues. And certainly for me, when I look at that, what I think of as an organic type of evolution, the city is growing. The city is growing no matter what. And my sense is that I would rather, as I mentioned off the top, I would rather look at that evolution, at that growth, with intentional transformation in mind, rather than let it just happen randomly. And so that's why we look at sort of the longer term as well as the short term responses. And we have big plans that ran over 5 to 20 years. But we're also looking very closely at the needs of the immediate services. And you touched on something, or you alluded to something, I think, about the diversity of response that's needed in dealing with safety and security. And some of that is almost what I would call cosmetic, in the sense of the need to ensure that things are clean and maintained, and paint is repaired, windows are repaired, and all of that sense of the comfort, the vital sense of the look of the city, the feel of the city. And then at the other side, of course, there is the very realistic and very real requirement to have some type of an enforcement capacity. And that's, for me, also a conversation where you look at traditional policing, very important for dealing with crime, but you also need to start opening the doors, and we have, to more civilian-based responses to community security. And as you well know, we've been involved with a really important pilot project, the peer-assisted community response teams, that have been very successful in other communities, that respond to non-criminal crises in the community with compassion and health and different types of advisory people who are professionals and experts, but don't attend when there isn't a criminal element to a crisis. When someone is really needing support, is in a position where they have to have some emergency response, but it is not involved with a criminal activity. And so that there's sort of those two sides of the same coin, where we have to be robust in our provision of emergency response that's non-criminal, as well as emergency response that deals with a criminal element, and everything in between. We really do have to look at the quality of life, the vitality of the city, from the perspective of nurturing what's here and building on that intentionally, but also being adequately responsive across that continuum.
There's also some displaced anger in terms of people feeling that those who access services at our place are part of the problem, whereas so many people that we work with are those who are being preyed upon by others. And yes. We desperately need people to understand that most, people, 99% of the people we serve are people who are just desperate to access resources and find new paths. They're the ones that are in fear of anyone who comes along for the wrong reason to commit violence or any kind of crime. Especially the women in that we see are preyed upon so much. It is still a challenge as much as this is a wonderful city.
It is, and I think you point out something that's really important for all of us to remember. The simple fact of being poor or unhoused is not a crime. And you need to distinguish the fact that there are people whose lives, for whatever reason, are incredibly challenged. There are also people who are criminals. They're not the same thing. And I think what's important for us to remember is that we need to deal with criminals within the criminal justice system in that way, with policing and probation and courts and all of the different aspects of that. And sometimes we don't do that very well. And you'll be very aware, and that I don't know if your viewers would be, but one of my former colleagues, Councillor Thornton Joe, and I have been sort of beating the drum about the revolving door of criminals who are charged with very serious offenses, and often repeating offenses, and are brought in, booked and let go. And so there have been some important upcoming changes to those types of laws with cooperation with both the province and the feds. But it kind of points to that fact that we're always told by the police each time they come and brief us, there are very few number of very hardened criminals who are responsible for a very high amount of the crime. And if we could find a way to deal with that relatively limited cohort, it would make a significant difference, not just in the quality of life for all residents, but exactly in the way that you've described, in the vulnerability of many of the folks who take advantage of your programs. And so this is two different things that sometimes I think it's too easy to conflate. And it's because it's easy. It's easy to say, well, I see these folks who are struggling, they must be somehow involved, with the criminal element. And that is not the case. I mean, is it possible? Of course. Are there isolated incidents and individuals? Of course, that's true across all of society. But to conflate the two absolutely is, I think, very unfair and untrue.
That leads us to housing. Housing's the solution for everything, right?
Well, not alone, but it's certainly an important first step, without a doubt. I mean, we do believe.
And of course, sorry, I was being facetious.
Yeah, of course, I know, and I knew that. Yeah, I mean, housing is a type of solution to everything, at least if it's the right kind of housing. And one of the things I think that I've been very impressed by is this council's commitment to looking not just at housing from the perspective of supply, but all the different types of housing, the typology of housing, that looks from how do we become important partners in creating opportunities for there to be everything from very supportive, very low income driven housing, all across the continuum of affordability, up into the middle ranges. And that's a hugely critical priority for this council. And interestingly, also kind of being wrapped in a newer, maybe not new, but certainly a more robust envelope of climate adaptation, and how those two things support one another. But there's no doubt that housing is an essential component of recovery and evolution for folks who sample your services, and folks who are challenged for a whole variety of reasons. And if we could build enough of the right kind of housing fast enough, we would certainly have some significant inroads in solution finding for unhoused and challenged folks, for sure. And
Right.
I have to say that you have to give kudos to the province. They've done an enormous amount in the last few years, in particular. I mean, they were thrust into this in COVID, and have come out of that, I think, with a new understanding of how critical housing is, how much demand there is, and how fast it has to happen and be diverse. And so I think the other day I was at an event with the Minister of Housing, and I think he was speaking to, just in the city, or certainly in Greater Victoria, over 500 units of supportive and affordable housing already built. And I think it was something like 1,500 already in the works. Much of that is in the city, but I will say again, hearkening back to earlier in our conversation, we're excited when some of it is not. So I think last spring, when there was an announcement of 7 new supportive housing facilities, 5 of them are in Victoria, but 2 of them are not, which is really important. One's in Saanich, and I think one was somewhere in the Western communities. And that's good, because it speaks to that diversification and that understanding from each municipality that they need to do good work for their own residents, whether they're housed or unhoused, they're still their residents. And providing those opportunities locally is really important.
Yeah, and we worked with BC Housing, the provincial government, quite a bit to house a lot of people, and it has done nothing but invigorate us in terms of seeing the differences, people who have come into our housing versus the paths they've taken months later. I was at the same luncheon, and they had some interesting ideas around legislation that they're looking at, where some single family homes would be torn down and turned into like multiplex homes to be able to house more people. Is that something that Victoria will be involved in? Is that something you're looking at?
That actually, we feel quite pleased with the fact that the provincial government pretty much copied Victoria's own housing policies, which we, I think, probably incorrectly named missing middle, only because it comes with all sorts of different interpretations. But it is a sense that the provincial government is now looking at adapting that local policy and applying it to the whole province, where a person who owns a single family home zoned lot, so a lot that currently would only allow for one dwelling, has the opportunity to choose to either remodel that home, so not necessarily tear it down, or to replace it with a multi-unit operation. And so in Victoria City, actually, our policy is a bit more robust even than the provinces, and that the province is allowing for 3 or 4 units in most lots. And in the city, actually, we're looking at up to 6 units on most lots. And so it does allow that capacity, as the minister spoke, as you heard at that event, for folks who need to downsize, who are house rich and capacity poor, to be able to say, yeah, let's renovate the house so that my kids can live there, or I can rent a unit or something of that nature, and better use the limited land base that we have access to house more people more thoughtfully. And this is, I think, a great alternative. Downtown cores, often and somewhat necessarily look at high density, higher buildings, a bit more packed. But when you go beyond the downtown core, I think it's a really important improvement to have the option of being able to do, lower heights, more green space, more open space, things that are more compatible and character-like to existing homes, but still have more units in them. I mean, really what we're talking about is how do we best manufacture more homes for people? And ultimately, having what we've called missing middle allows more people to do that. And I think it's important to remember in the housing discussion, it's not required, right? I mean, it's an option for people. And so it means if you're in that situation where you want to downsize, or you're older and you can't afford to stay there, but you want to stay in your neighborhood, or you have multiple generations, all sorts of things, it becomes possible and easier. I can't see how that's anything but good.
Let's end this discussion with talking about our role. Our place has worked closely with the city for as long as we've been here, hopefully providing wonderful solutions and looking for ways we can always partner to make the community better. You've been part of the city for a long time. How do you view the partnership with our place, and maybe not just our place, but similar service providers?
Yeah, I think, I have been involved with our place for quite some time, and certainly have always enjoyed the opportunity to be there and help serve and be part of different programs and educational pieces and whatnot. And I've been the liaison to the neighborhood a number of times, so I've had a chance to be involved in that. Harm reduction for me has always been a really huge priority, and it's something, work that I've done for a long time. Our place, I think, is really unique in the diversity of services that it offers, and the fact that it has, I think it's not shy to say, a real leadership role in the downtown service providers group, where you come together and collectively, speak about the needs of the people you're serving and how best to respond to that. So I think you should take some pride in having that leadership role and in providing those services, and the way you collaborate with your colleagues and with other service providers, I think, is a wonderful example of how much can get done with remarkably little, really, on the face of the world. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because those of us who fund you, right, can go, look how much they get done with so little. But on the other hand, you do provide essential services for so many people that it is remarkable. And it's always been my pleasure to work with our place and to try in some tiny way to be supportive of that work.
Wonderful, and we're looking forward to the years ahead to see what we can do together. Thank you very much, Mayor Alto, for this today and for helping lead us through the times ahead.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure speaking with you anytime.
You've been listening to the Heart of the Matter podcast. For more information about our place and the vital programs and services provided to the Greater Victoria community, please go to www.ourplacesociety.com. Our Place is a registered BC charity. You can donate by visiting the website or by calling 250-940-5060. Help us to bring hope and belonging to those in need.